Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the early morning streets of Ottoman Istanbul, where the mist from the Bosphorus hangs low and the city is just beginning to stir. Somewhere nearby, a brazier crackles, copper pots clink softly, and the smell of something dark, bitter, and strangely inviting drifts through the cool air. It's coffee thick, strong, and about to reshape how an entire empire spends its afternoons. You wander along narrow stone streets, where merchants are opening their shutters and stray cats patrol the alleys like slightly judgmental supervisors. The city feels half awake, like it hasn't quite decided whether to stretch or roll over for another hour. And honestly, if you had lived here about 500 years ago, there's a decent chance you wouldn't survive the caffeine. Not because it's dangerous, exactly, but because Ottoman coffee is so strong, it makes modern espresso look like lightly caffeinated soup. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, maybe drop a comment telling me where you're re-listening from and what your local time is right now. It's always fascinating to imagine this story drifting across the world, one sleepy listener at a time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move through the city just as the sun begins brushing the rooftops of Istanbul, though, in the 16th century. It's still officially called Constantinople by many outsiders. The Ottoman Empire rules here, vast and powerful, stretching across 3 continents. Markets bustle, ships crowd the harbor, and the call to prayer will soon ripple over the skyline. But before the real noise begins, you notice a small gathering forming near a simple wooden stall. A man in a long robe crouches beside a charcoal brazier, carefully stirring a tiny pot with a long handle. The pot is narrow at the neck, wide at the belly, what people today would recognize as a set of inside. Finely ground coffee beans swirl in dark foam. This right here is one of the earliest public moments of a drink that will change daily life across the Ottoman world. Coffee itself is not originally from the Ottoman Empire. The beans begin their journey hundreds of miles south in the mountainous regions of Yemen. By the early 1500s, merchants are already carrying sacks of the strange roasted beans northward along trade routes that connect the Red Sea to major Ottoman cities. One mainstream historical fact historians agree on is that coffee arrived in Istanbul around the mid-16th century, likely introduced by traders from Yemen and Syria. Within a few decades, it becomes wildly popular. And as you watch the vendor carefully lift the pot from the coals, the crowd leans in slightly. The smell is intense, earthy, bitter, almost smoky. Someone mutters that the drink keeps you awake for prayers. Another insists it sharpens the mind. A third guy probably just likes that it tastes like burnt mystery beans. Historians still argue whether the first coffee houses in Istanbul appeared around 1554 or slightly earlier. But everyone agrees that once coffee arrived, it didn't take long for people to start gathering around it. You accept a tiny, handleless cup. The liquid inside is dark as midnight, and thick enough that you read pretty sure it could legally qualify as soup. There's no milk, no sugar, unless you request it beforehand, and absolutely no oat milk options. Ottoman baristas, sadly, are not here for your modern customization requests. You take a careful sip, your eyes widen, your ancestors feel it. Your future descendants probably feel it too. Somewhere nearby, a sleepy donkey brays, as if reacting to the caffeine spike radiating from the crowd. But the real magic isn't just the drink, it's what happens around it. People linger, they sit, they talk. In a city that's normally busy with trade, politics, and constant movement, coffee creates something unusual, permission to pause, and that pause becomes one of the defining rhythms of Ottoman life. Throughout the empire, afternoons are warm, markets slow down, and work often takes a natural lull. Coffee fits perfectly into this space. Not as a rushed morning drink like in modern offices, but as a companion to slow conversation, and occasionally, a very strategic nap. You notice something interesting. A man nearby finishes his cup, stretches slightly, and leans back against the wooden wall. Within minutes, his eyes close. Another patron nudges his friend and whispers something that makes them both chuckle quietly. Coffee, it seems, is both energizing and oddly calming when you're sitting in a shaded courtyard with nowhere urgent to be. That paradox becomes part of the culture. One quirky historical tidbit is that early critics of coffee claimed it made people lazy by encouraging long hours of sitting and talking, which, to be fair, is not entirely inaccurate. If someone introduced free Wi-Fi to this scene, the empire might never get anything done again. Still, the drink spreads. Ships bring more beans from Yemen's port of Mocha. Caravans carry sacks across desert roads. Roasters experiment with techniques, discovering that finely grinding the beans and boiling them directly in water produces the richest flavor. Soon, dedicated coffee houses kavan begin, appearing across the city. They're simple places at first: wooden benches, low tables, maybe a shaded courtyard if the owner is feeling ambitious, but something about them captures the imagination of Istanbul. Merchants gather there after market hours. Poets recite verses. Travelers swap stories about distant provinces, and occasionally someone falls asleep mid-conversation, which honestly just adds to the relaxed atmosphere. The Ottoman Empire, powerful and sprawling though it is, suddenly finds itself developing a new kind of public space, one built not around trade or religion, but around a shared cup of coffee and the gentle art of lingering. Historians still argue whether the rulers of the empire initially understood what they had unleashed, because while coffee houses seem harmless just drinks and conversation, they slowly become places where ideas travel faster than caravans. But for now, in this quiet early morning street, none of that tension has surfaced yet. Right now, there's only the soft hiss of charcoal, the clink of tiny cups, and the slow awakening of a city discovering a new ritual. You take another sip. Yep, still extremely strong. And somewhere deep in the rhythm of Ottoman life, the first perfect afternoon nap is already being planned. The taste of that first cup still lingers in your mouth as the morning in Istanbul stretches awake around you. The bitterness is almost heroic, the kind of flavor that seems determined to make an impression on your entire personality. You set the small porcelain cup down, and the vendor immediately flips it upside down on the saucer grounds, settling inside like dark little constellations. But this drink, intense as it is, hasn't always been here. If you trace its path backward, far beyond these cobbled Ottoman streets, the story drifts south across the Red Sea to the rugged mountains of Yemen. And at S, where you begin to understand how coffee first becomes something more than just a curious bean. Picture steep terraced hillsides where morning fog curls around stone villages. Farmers tend small trees with glossy green leaves and clusters of bright red cherries. Inside those cherries sit the seeds that will eventually become coffee beans. One well-established historical fact is that Yemen becomes the first major center of coffee cultivation and trade during the 15th century, the port city of Mocha. That Mocha serves as the main gateway through which coffee spreads across the Islamic world. And if you were wandering through Yemen around that time, you might notice something unusual happening inside Sufi monasteries. Sufi mystics are known for long nights of prayer, meditation, and chanting. Staying awake for these spiritual gatherings isn't always easy. Even deeply devoted mystics sometimes struggle with the universal human challenge, known as accidentally falling asleep during something important: enter coffee. According to several early accounts, Sufi practitioners begin drinking a brewed version of roasted coffee beans to help maintain alertness during night rituals. It's not exactly marketed as a luxury beverage. At first, it's closer to a spiritual productivity tool. Imagine monks sipping thick, bitter brew at midnight while quietly chanting. If you listen carefully, you might even hear someone whisper, maybe just one more cup. Historians generally agree that Sufi communities play a key role in spreading coffee culture throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Traveling mystics carry both the beans and the brewing method with them as they move between cities. But as with many origin stories, there's also a slightly weirder legend floating around. One popular tale involves an Ethiopian goat herder named Kaldi, who supposedly discovers coffee after noticing his goats dancing energetically after eating red coffee cherries. The goats are apparently so lively that Kaldi investigates, tries the cherries himself, and voila, the world gains caffeine. Now, historians still argue whether this story has any real historical basis. Most scholars think it's more of a charming folktale that appears centuries later, but it's difficult to resist the mental image of extremely caffeinated goats throwing the first coffee rave in East Africa. Regardless of goat choreography, coffee's spread becomes unstoppable. By the early 1500s, Yemeni traders are shipping roasted beans across the Red Sea to cities like Cairo, Damascus, and eventually the Ottoman territories. The Ottomans, who control vast trade networks, quickly recognized the appeal of this strange beverage. Caravans begin carrying sacks of beans across deserts and mountain passes. Picture long lines of camels swaying slowly across dusty roads, each one carrying burlap bundles filled with coffee beans that smell faintly of smoke and fruit. The merchants traveling with them have heard rumors about the drink. Some say it sharpens the mind, others claim it helps digestion. A few suspicious grandmothers probably insist it makes people talk too much. When coffee finally arrives in the great Ottoman cities, it arrives with a reputation already forming, not just as a drink, but as a social catalyst. Back in Istanbul, you notice the vendor preparing another pot. His movements are slow and practiced almost ceremonial. Finely ground coffee is spooned into the sez, along with water and sometimes a little sugar. The pot rests in hot sand or over glowing coals, heating gradually until a thick foam forms on top. There's no rushing this process. Ottoman coffee culture develops around patience. You wait while the drink heats. You wait while it settles. And afterward, you sit and talk instead of rushing off with a to-go cup in a mild existential crisis. In fact, if someone in the 16th century tried to grab their coffee and sprint down the street, the entire coffee house might stare at them like they had just committed a minor social crime. Another quirky historical tidbit: Yemeni coffee merchants become extremely protective of their beans. To prevent other regions from growing coffee themselves, they sometimes boil or partially roast the beans before export, making them unable to germinate. It's basically the 16th century version of intellectual property protection. Still, coffee plants eventually escape Yemen's monopoly thanks partly to smugglers and ambitious botanists. But during the early Ottoman period, Yemen remains the empire's primary coffee supplier, and every cup in Istanbul carries that long journey within it. You sip again and feel the warmth spread through your chest. Around you, the city is now fully awake. Vendors shout prices in the distance. Donkeys clatter past with wooden carts. But something else is happening too. People are staying. They're not just buying coffee and leaving. They're gathering around the vendor's stall, leaning against walls, sitting on crates, exchanging news and gossip. A fisherman explains the morning's catch. A spice merchant complains about caravan delays. Someone tells a joke so slow and elaborate that by the time the punchline arrives, half the listeners are already halfway into a comfortable afternoon nap. Coffee, it turns out, doesn't just wake people up. It creates a space where time loosens its grip. And before long, someone is going to realize that if you build a permanent place for this kind of lingering, people will happily fill it every single day. The idea of the coffee house, the Coffeehouses, quietly brewing, just like the drink itself, you begin to notice that every cup of coffee in this slowly waking city carries an entire travel story hidden inside it. Not the romantic kind, where a violin swells and someone gazes dramatically across the seabut. The real kind, full of dust camels, bargaining, and at least one merchant loudly insisting that his beans are the finest in 3 continents. My friend, I swear on my cousin's donkey. Because before coffee ever reaches your little stall in Istanbul, it spends weeks, sometimes months on the road. Picture the port of Mocha on Yemen's western coast. The harbor smells of salt, spices, and roasting coffee beans drifting through the narrow streets. Ships from across the Red Sea arrive with sails snapping in the wind, their decks stacked with cargo from India, East Africa, and Arabia. One well-established historical fact is that Mocha becomes the world. As central coffee trading port during the 16th and 17th centuries, merchants from the Ottoman Empire purchase massive quantities of beans here, loading them onto ships or camel caravans bound north. You can almost hear the negotiations. A Yemeni trader stands beside a stack of burlap sacks while an Ottoman merchant inspects the beans, rubbing them between his fingers like a jeweler checking gemstones. Both men speak calmly, but every sentence contains layers of bargaining. No, no, these are mountain beans, very rare. Rare. My friend, last week I saw 5 camels full of these rare beans. Meanwhile, the camels themselves are chewing patiently and wondering why humans insist on discussing coffee for 3 hours straight. Once purchased, the beans begin their long journey across the Red Sea or along dusty caravan routes. If you follow one caravan north, you'll find yourself moving slowly through deserts, where the wind drifts sand across ancient paths. The pace is steady but unhurried. Camels sway gently, bells clinking on their harnesses. At night, the merchants gather around small fires, brewing coffee in tiny pots that look suspiciously like the one you saw earlier in Istanbul. Yes, coffee accompanies its own trade routes. It's the ultimate product testing strategy. Someone pours a cup and says something like, needs slightly darker roasting. Another traveler shrugs and says, it tastes like burnt walnuts, but I feel awake enough to walk to Damascus. So, success. Historians still argue whether these caravan coffee rituals helped standardize brewing techniques across the Ottoman world, or whether each region developed its own slightly different style along the way. Either way, the drink spreads rapidly, and rumors spread even faster. By the time coffee reaches major cities like Cairo and Damascus, people are already whispering about its strange effects. Some claim it sharpens memory, others say it helps digestion. One particularly dramatic rumor insists it can cure laziness, which, judging by the future popularity of afternoon naps, might be a slight exaggeration. You can imagine the first travelers arriving in Istanbul with sacks of beans and telling curious locals about the drink. It keeps you awake all night, someone explains. A nearby listener probably nods thoughtfully and says, perfect for arguing about philosophy. Another quirky historical tidbit floats around the trade routes. Some merchants claim that the best coffee beans are the ones transported by the calmest camels. The theory is that relaxed camels create smoother journeys, which somehow leads to better flavor. Is this scientifically accurate? Almost certainly not. But it does create the amusing image of merchants trying to emotionally support their camels for optimal bean quality. Easy there, Mustafa, the camel. Think peaceful thoughts. We're making premium coffee here. As the caravans approach Ottoman territories, the landscape slowly changes. Dry deserts give way to greener valleys, rivers, and eventually the bustling edges of major cities. And once the beans arrive, everything accelerates. Roasters in Ottoman markets begin experimenting with techniques. Instead of lightly roasting the beans, like some earlier traditions, many Ottoman coffee makers push the roasting process further, producing a deep, dark flavor. Then comes the grinding. Ottoman coffee requires beans to be ground incredibly fine, almost like powder. Specialized grinders appear in markets, their metal mechanisms turning slowly as merchants prepare fresh batches. The result is something unique. Unlike modern filtered coffee, Ottoman coffee is brewed with the grounds still inside the cup. When the water boils in the sezv, the powdery grounds create a thick texture and rich foam on top. The first time you drink it, you might glance suspiciously at the sediment in the bottom of the cup. That's normal. Everyone does that. But once people get used to it, the drink becomes addictive. Back in the Istanbul street, more customers have gathered around the stall. Someone is explaining that the beans came from Yemen by ship. Another insists they arrived by caravan through Damascus. A third person confidently claims his cousin personally escorted the beans across the desert while fighting off bandits, sandstorms, and possibly a very rude goat. The truth is probably less dramatic, but the stories themselves are part of the charm. Coffee invites storytelling. You notice the group growing larger. A man sits on an overturned crate. Another leans against a wall with his arms folded. Nobody seems particularly rushed to leave. That lingering effect is beginning to shape something new in the city, because once people realize they enjoy sitting together with coffee, the next logical step appears. Someone thinks, what if we had a place designed specifically for this? A place with benches, shade, maybe even cushions if the owner is feeling luxurious. A place where you can drink coffee, talk for hours, and if the conversation gets slow accidentally, drift into a peaceful little nap without anyone judging you. That idea is about to change Ottoman urban life forever. But right now, the beans are still arriving. Caravans keep rolling north. Ships keep docking at busy ports. And across the empire, more and more people are discovering the same realization you're having with this second cup. Coffee isn't just a drink. It's an invitation to stay a while. By the time the sun climbs higher over Istanbul's rooftops, the coffee stall you've been lingering near has quietly transformed into something resembling a tiny social universe. At first, it was just a few curious drinkers gathering around a brazier. Now there are perhaps 15 people standing, sitting, leaning, and slowly orbiting around the vendor-like planets around a very caffeinated sun. The charcoal glows warmly beneath the small copper pot, and the man running the stall moves with calm efficiencies. Scoop, stir, pour, flip the cup, repeat. You begin to realize something interesting. People aren't just here for the drink, they're here for the pause. One mainstream historical fact scholars agree on is that by the mid-1500s, coffee vendors had begun appearing in Ottoman cities as informal street sellers before permanent coffeehouses fully emerged. These early vendors served as the testing ground for the culture that would follow, and you can see exactly how it happens. A fisherman arrives, smelling faintly of sea salt and patience. He orders a cup and immediately begins describing the morning catch to anyone willing to listen, which turns out to be most of the crowd. Nearby, a tailor holds his cup carefully while inspecting a piece of cloth he's brought along. Every few minutes, he glances up to contribute a thoughtful to the fisherman's story. Even though you suspect he hasn't heard half of it, two young apprentices whisper about a girl they saw at the market. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone else yawns. And there it is, again that strange balance coffee creates. The drink itself wakes you up, but the atmosphere encourages you to slow down. You take another sip and feel the warmth spread behind your eyes. It's not the jittery rush modern coffee sometimes brings. Instead, it's steady, grounding, like someone turned up the brightness on your brain just a little. Across the street, a small wooden bench appears. No one is entirely sure who brought it first. Maybe the vendor dragged it out from his home. Maybe a regular customer donated it after getting tired of standing. But suddenly, there's a place to sit. And the moment someone sits down with coffee, everything changes. Because standing encourages movement. Sitting encourages staying. Within minutes, the bench fills. Another crate gets dragged over. Someone sits cross-legged on the ground. The gathering becomes less like a quick stop and more like, well, a destination. Historians still argue whether the very first Ottoman coffeehouse began exactly like this, with a vendor gradually adding seating until the place essentially became permanent. But the pattern appears again and again in historical descriptions. Coffee first, then benches, then conversation. Then suddenly you have an institution. You notice something else unfolding around you. The fisherman's tale about the morning. Catch has evolved into a dramatic narrative involving a suspiciously large fish and at least one heroic struggle with a net. The tailor nods solemnly as though witnessing an epic saga. A boy carrying bread pauses just long enough to hear the punchline, laughs, and continues down the street. Another patron begins telling a joke about a judge, a donkey, and a basket of figs. The story takes so long to reach the ending that by the time it arrives, half the audience has forgotten the beginning, but everyone laughs anyway. One quirky historical tidbit is that early critics of coffeehouses claimed they encouraged idle chatter and pointless storytelling, which is technically true, but also kind of the point. The Ottoman world already has plenty of places for serious business: mosques, markets, government courts. Coffee gatherings create something different, a social space where conversation can wander. And wandering conversations have a habit of drifting into unexpected territory. You notice a man with a long beard leaning closer to another patron. They're discussing trade routes, now something about caravans arriving late from Aleppo. A third listener joins in, adding a rumor he heard from a traveler last week. Information moves quickly in places like this. News from distant provinces, market prices, political gossip. If Twitter existed in the 1500s, coffee stalls like this would basically be the trending page. Of course, not everyone is talking. One older man sits very still near the wall, holding his cup with both hands. His eyes close briefly, then open again, close again. He's not exactly asleep, more like hovering at the edge of a nap. And nobody seems to mind. In fact, a younger patron quietly slides a folded cloak behind the man's back so he can lean more comfortably against the wall. That small gesture says a lot about the culture forming here. Coffee might bring people together, but rest is still respected. Ottoman daily life often includes a natural lull in the afternoon, especially during warmer months. Work slows, markets quiet. Even officials sometimes step away from duties for a while. So the coffee stall becomes the perfect companion to that rhythm. Drink, talk, pause. Maybe close your eyes for a few minutes while the world hums softly around you. Another interesting detail you notice is the cups themselves. They're small, much smaller than modern mugs. Ottoman coffee is meant to be strong and concentrated, not gulped down in large quantities. It's closer to a ritual than a beverage. The vendor pours another round. Foam rises delicately to the rim of each cup. People lift them carefully, sipping slowly. And as the morning fades toward midday, something subtle but important becomes clear. This isn't just a temporary gathering anymore. It's becoming a habit. Tomorrow, these same people will likely return. Next week, there may be more benches. Next month, someone might build a small roof for shade. And before long, Istanbul will begin to fill with places designed specifically for this exact moment you're experiencing. Places where coffee, conversation, and the occasional accidental nap coexist in peaceful harmony. The first true coffee houses are almost ready to appear. But for now, the stall keeps brewing. The bench creaks softly as someone shifts. A pigeon lands nearby, eyeing the crumbs with professional interest. And somewhere in the middle of it all, another cup of coffee quietly begins its slow journey toward becoming someone's perfect afternoon pause. By now, the small coffee stall feels less like a vendoress corner and more like the seat of something larger. The bench is full. Another crate has been claimed as a seat. Someone has even leaned a wooden board against the wall to create a makeshift table, which is currently holding 3 tiny cups and a loaf of bread that nobody seems to remember bringing. And this, slowly but unmistakably, is how the first true Ottoman coffee houses begin. Not with grand openings or elegant buildings, but with people discovering they enjoy sitting together with coffee a little too much to keep doing it in the street. One widely accepted historical fact is that the first recorded coffee houses in Istanbul appear around 1554, opened by 2 merchants, one from Damascus and one from Aleppo. Their names are often given as Hokum of Aleppo and Shams of Damascus. They establish a permanent place where coffee is brewed and served specifically for groups of patrons. Historians generally agree that these early coffee houses appear in the bustling Tahtakali district near Istanbul's markets, an area already packed with merchants, sailors, craftsmen, and travelers, which makes perfect sense. If you were opening a place dedicated to sitting around talking for hours, you'd probably want to locate it somewhere people were already halfway inclined to procrastinate. You wander through the district and soon spot one of these new establishments. From the outside, it doesn't look particularly grand. The building is wooden, slightly crooked, and shaded by an awning that flutters lazily in the breeze. But inside, something fascinating is happening. Instead of a quick transaction like at the street stall, people are settling in. Low benches line the walls. A few small tables sit in the center. The air smells of roasted coffee and warm wood. Sunlight drifts through narrow windows, lighting dust motes that float lazily like sleepy fireflies. A man near the entrance carefully prepares coffee using the familiar says. The process is slow and deliberate: grounds, water, heat, foam. No rushing. Ottoman coffee houses quickly become known as Coffeehouses, literally meaning coffee house, and despite the simple setup, they attract an astonishing range of visitors. Merchants arrive after closing their shops. Artisans stop by between jobs. Sailors wander in after long journeys. Students drift through looking for conversation, or perhaps a strategic nap. Within weeks, the room develops its own rhythm. Someone always seems to be telling a story. Someone always seems to be arguing about something trivial. And someone, inevitably, is snoring quietly in the corner. One quirky historical tidbit from early descriptions is that coffee houses were sometimes nicknamed schools of the wise, not because formal lessons were taught there, but because conversations could wander into philosophy, poetry, religion, and politics. Though if you listen carefully, at least 40% of those discussions are probably about the price of fish. You take a seat along the wall and notice how the room sounds different from the busy market outside. Markets are loud, urgent, full of bargaining. Coffee houses hum, voices stay low. Conversations stretch comfortably. Cups clink softly on saucers. And something else begins appearing here that rarely exists in crowded cities: unstructured time. A merchant might arrive planning to stay 10 minutes and end up remaining 2 hours because someone mentioned an interesting poem. A traveler might stop in for coffee and suddenly become the center of attention while describing a distant province. A group of regulars might meet every afternoon without planning it, simply because they know the others will probably be there. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee houses deliberately encouraged this lingering atmosphere or whether it emerged naturally from the culture around coffee. But the effect is unmistakable. These places slow people down, and slowing down opens space for something else. Observation. You start noticing little rituals developing. A new visitor enters and greets the room with a polite nod. Someone offers them a seat. The host pours coffee carefully, making sure each cup carries a layer of foam on top, a sign of proper preparation. If the foam is especially good, someone nearby might quietly compliment the brewer. Coffee craftsmanship becomes a subtle point of pride. Another small detail catches your attention. The cups themselves sit inside decorative metal holders. These holders protect fingers from the heat and add a touch of elegance to even the simplest drink, because while the coffee house may look humble, hospitality is taken seriously. If someone spills coffee, a cloth appears instantly. If a traveler seems tired, someone shifts over to make room on the bench. If a conversation becomes heated perhaps over whether Damascus beans taste better than Yemeni beans, another patron gently steers the topic back toward safer ground, usually with a joke. Speaking of jokes, one patron begins telling a long, winding story about a judge who tried coffee for the first time and stayed awake so long he accidentally presided over court for 20 hours straight. Is the story true? Almost certainly not, but everyone laughs anyway. The man in the corner, who had been half asleep now, opens one eye, smiles faintly, and returns to his nap. Outside, the afternoon sun warms the city streets. Inside the coffee house, time seems to stretch. You realize that what you re-witnessing isn't just a new type of business, a new kind of public space, a place where strangers can sit together without a formal purpose, a place where conversation is the main activity, a place where a cup of coffee quietly holds the entire experience together. And though no one here knows it yet, the Ottoman coffee house is about to become one of the most influential social inventions in urban history. All because someone once thought, maybe we should add a few benches. You settle deeper into the bench, and after a while you begin noticing the small details that make this early coffee house feel so strangely comfortable. It isn't luxurious, not even close. The wooden floor creaks occasionally when someone shifts their weight. The tables are simple planks balanced on sturdy legs. Sunlight pushes through the narrow windows in long golden strips that slowly slide across the room as the afternoon unfolds. But comfort here comes from atmosphere, not furniture. The low murmur of conversation fills the room like a gentle tide. No one speaks too loudly, no one rushes. Even the man preparing coffee moves slowly, almost meditatively, as he stirs the seize over glowing coals. One historical fact often noted by scholars is that early Ottoman coffee houses were intentionally simple spaces. They were designed less like taverns and more like quiet gathering rooms, places where conversation, not drinking, was the main attraction. And yet, despite the simplicity, the room feels alive. You notice how people arrange themselves naturally. Regulars tend to occupy the same spots along the wall. Newcomers drift toward the middle tables until someone invites them to join a bench. Older men often claim the seats closest to the warmest part of the room, while younger visitors perch near the doorway where they can watch the street. In the far corner, two men are speaking so softly you can barely hear them. They lean close together, their heads almost touching, discussing something that sounds suspiciously philosophical. Is time real? One murmurs, or simply a way to measure coffee breaks? The other nods thoughtfully. Historians still argue whether coffee houses encouraged these philosophical conversations or merely attracted people who were already inclined to think this way. But either way, the room slowly becomes a magnet for thinkers, storytellers, and professional conversationalists. Of course, not every discussion reaches the lofty heights of philosophy. Across the room, a pair of merchants are debating something far more urgent: the correct way to roast coffee beans. One insists darker roasting brings out the true spirit of the bean. The other argues that roasting too long destroys the delicate character. Their argument has clearly been running for at least 20 minutes. You suspect it may continue for several centuries. Another quirky historical tidbit is that Ottoman coffee houses sometimes became known for their regular debate circles. Patrons would return day after day to continue ongoing arguments about poetry, religion, science, or occasionally the deeply serious question of whose donkey was the laziest. Yes, apparently donkey laziness rankings were a legitimate topic of discussion. Near the center table, a small group has gathered around a storyteller. This man speaks with dramatic flair, his hands painting pictures in the air as he describes a caravan journey through Anatolia. According to his version of events, the travelers encountered snowstorms, bandits, mysterious travelers, and at least one heroic camel who saved the group by refusing to move in the wrong direction. Everyone listens with polite fascination. Even the coffee brewer pauses briefly to hear the ending. Because stories fit perfectly into the rhythm of a coffeehouse. They stretch time, they invite imagination, and they give listeners an excuse to lean back, sip slowly, and let their minds wander. You begin to notice something else drifting through the room: the smell. Coffee is the dominant scent, of course dark and rich and slightly smoky. But it isn't alone. Someone nearby has opened a small pouch of cardamom, sprinkling a little into their cup. The spice adds a sweet, fragrant note that floats through the air. Another patron has lit a small pipe of tobacco, releasing slow curls of smoke that twist upward toward the rafters. Together, the smells blend into a kind of signature aroma for the coffeehouse: roasted beans, warm wood, spice, and faint tobacco. If someone bottled it today, they would probably call it Eau de Historical Relaxation. You shift slightly on the bench and notice the man beside you doing something curious. He finishes his coffee, sets the cup down, and leans back against the wall. Within minutes, his breathing slows, his eyes close, and there it is, again that gentle drifting into sleep. The fascinating part is how completely normal this seems to everyone else. No one wakes him, no one complains. A young apprentice even lowers his voice slightly while speaking nearby. Ottoman daily life often included brief periods of rest during the afternoon, especially in warmer climates where working continuously under the sun wasn't practical. Coffeehouses become the perfect setting for these pauses. Drink first, talk a while. Then, if the moment feels right, close your eyes for a few minutes while the quiet hum of conversation continues around you. It's almost like the room itself encourages a kind of social napping. You imagine someone trying to explain this concept to a modern office manager. Yes, we gather in the afternoon to drink extremely strong coffee, and then sometimes fall asleep. Oddly enough, it works, because the caffeine helps you wake up again later. One short nap, one small cup, and suddenly the rest of the day feels manageable. Historians still debate whether these coffeehouse naps were intentional or simply an accidental side effect of comfortable seating and warm rooms. But regular patrons seem to master the balance: a sip, a story, a short nap. Another sip. Outside, the city continues its endless motion markets bustling. Ships arriving, officials conducting serious business. Inside the coffeehouse, time softens. The murmur of voices continues. A cup clinks quietly. Someone chuckles at a joke you missed while staring at the drifting sunlight. And somewhere near the back wall, a man snores softly, proving that even in the presence of the strongest coffee in the empire, the human body will occasionally vote in favor of a perfectly timed nap. The afternoon warmth settles gently over Istanbul, and you start to understand why this moment of the day feels so different from the morning bustle. Outside the coffeehouse door, the market still moves, but slower now. Merchants lean against their stalls rather than shouting prices. Donkeys seem less enthusiastic about hauling goods. Even the stray cats have stretched out in patches of sunlight like tiny emperors claiming their territory. Inside, the rhythm of the coffeehouse perfectly mirrors this quiet slowdown. Someone pours another round of coffee, someone finishes a story, and someone else, predictably, drifts into another short nap. This afternoon pause isn't accidental. It's part of a broader cultural rhythm that runs through much of the Ottoman world. Now, one widely recognized historical fact is that in many Mediterranean and Middle Eastern societies, midday breaks were common, especially during warmer months. Work often slowed in the hottest hours, allowing people to rest before returning to activity later in the day. The Ottomans didn't exactly invent the afternoon rest, but they certainly refined it, and coffeehouses became the ideal headquarters for this daily ritual. You lean back against the wall and feel the room settle into a kind of collective exhale. Conversations soften, cups empty slowly. The charcoal beneath the coffee pot glows steadily like a tiny sun. The atmosphere encourages exactly the kind of half-awake state where thoughts wander freely. A man across the room is staring thoughtfully at his cup, as though contemplating the mysteries of the universe, or possibly just wondering if there's more foam left. Historians still argue whether coffee's popularity actually increased the number of afternoon rests, or simply made those rests more socially organized. But the combination works surprisingly well. Coffee wakes the mind. Rest restores the body. Together, they create the perfect balance between alertness and relaxation. You notice one patron performing a small routine that seems almost practiced. First, he drinks half his cup. Then he leans back and closes his eyes for a few minutes. Then he wakes, finishes the rest of the coffee, stretches, and rejoins the conversation as if nothing happened. It's like a perfectly timed reboot. If modern productivity experts saw this, they'd probably call it strategic micro-est optimization. Here, it's just Tuesday. Another quirky historical tidbit emerges as to older patrons begin discussing the proper etiquette of coffeehouse napping. One insists that falling fully asleep in public is slightly embarrassing, and that a respectable patron should maintain at least partial awareness. The other argues that true relaxation requires complete surrender to the nap. Their debate becomes surprisingly philosophical. How can one enjoy rest? The second man says, if one is worried about appearing rested. The first man frowns thoughtfully. A third listener suggests the compromise solution: lean against the wall and pretend to listen while actually sleeping. Everyone agrees this is excellent strategy. You take another sip of coffee and notice how the room seems almost designed for this slow drifting. The benches run along the walls so people can lean comfortably. The lighting is soft and indirect. Even the murmur of conversation forms a kind of gentle background sound, just loud enough to be soothing without demanding attention. It's not silence, it's something better, a human kind of quiet. In one corner, a small group has begun discussing poetry. One man recites a few lines from memory while the others nod appreciation. Poetry is a major part of Ottoman cultural life, and coffeehouses quickly become informal venues where verses are shared, debated, and occasionally improved through enthusiastic criticism. Sometimes the improvements are questionable. One listener interrupts the recitation to suggest a different metaphor involving pomegranates. The poet sighs deeply, but the discussion continues anyway. Another man nearby has produced a small board and a handful of carved pieces. Backgammon, the familiar clicking sound of pieces striking wood, soon joins the soundtrack of the room. Board games appear frequently in coffeehouses, offering another slow-paced activity perfect for long afternoons. The players move deliberately, occasionally pausing mid-game to sip coffee or comment on a nearby conversation. No one rushes. Speed would almost feel rude. Historians still debate whether the Ottoman coffeehouse helped shape this relaxed social pacing or simply provided a setting where it could flourish. But it's easy to see why the habit spreads. Life in a massive empire can be demanding. Trade routes must be managed, laws enforced, crops harvested, ships navigated. People need somewhere to decompress. And somehow, the humble combination of coffee, conversation, and comfortable seating turns out to be exactly what the empire ordered. You glance toward the doorway and notice new arrivals drifting inside: a spice merchant from the market, a pair of students carrying books, an elderly traveler who looks grateful for a place to sit. The coffee house absorbs them all easily, like a calm harbor, welcoming ships. Soon they're holding cups, leaning against benches, and slipping into the room's slow rhythm. The afternoon deepens. Sunlight fades slightly. Someone wins the backgammon game with a triumphant tap of the board. Someone else snores quietly in the corner again, proving that even after several cups of very strong coffee, the ancient art of the afternoon nap remains undefeated. And here in this warm, murmuring room, you realize something simple but profound. The Ottomans didn't just adopt coffee, they built an entire lifestyle around it. One sip, one conversation, one perfectly timed nap at a time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please consider subscribing for more stories. The afternoon drifts forward with the unhurried confidence of a cat strolling across a sunlit courtyard. No one here seems especially concerned with the exact time, and honestly, that may be part of the secret charm of this place. The room feels like a living organism made entirely of gentle discussions. Conversations move in waves. A topic rises, gathers attention, and then slowly fades as another one emerges nearby. It's a symphony of quiet chatter, punctuated by the clinking of small ceramic cups. At the center table, a man has just finished recounting a dramatic caravan story, complete with bandits and a suspiciously heroic mule. The listeners nod appreciatively, though I overhear one man quietly whisper to his neighbor that the storyteller has defeated these same bandits It seems coffeehouses are the ideal environment for politely tolerated exaggeration. Historically, Ottoman coffeehouses quickly became hubs for exactly this storytelling and oral culture. In an era before widespread printed media, this is how news, folklore, and entertainment spread. And when good coffee is involved, people are always willing to listen. I lift my cup and notice the familiar thick foam clinging to the surface. The grounds have already begun to settle at the bottom, forming mysterious patterns. Some people claim they can predict the future from these shapes, and sure enough, over by the wall, a man flips his empty cup upside down onto its saucer. After a moment, he lifts it to inspect the dark smudges left behind. He squints thoughtfully. "I see travel," he announces with authority. Another patron glances over. "You say that every time," the fortune teller replies calmly. "Well, eventually, someone will travel." You can't argue with that logic. Historians still debate whether coffee ground fortune reading or tasseography became popular this early or developed later. But the playful curiosity was definitely there from the start. After all, when you're sitting around drinking coffee for hours, eventually someone's going to start seeing shapes in the sludge. Nearby, a quieter but far more serious conversation is unfolding. Two men lean across their table, deep in a discussion about poetry. The subject is a famous Persian poet whose verses have traveled widely across the Islamic world. In Ottoman intellectual life, poetry holds enormous prestige. It's common for educated patrons to memorize long passages and recite them in gatherings like this. I listen as one man quotes a verse about love and longing. His companion responds with a slightly different version, insisting the metaphor originally referred to wine, not roses. Their debate becomes incredibly detailed, dissecting a single line for what feels like an eternity. I can't help but think the poet himself might have said, "Guys, it's just a poem." Still, everyone around them listens with polite interest. And that's another curious feature of the coffeehouse: the audience. In most public places, people would interrupt or wander away if a conversation became too niche. But here, the listeners are surprisingly patient. Perhaps it's the coffee that sharpens their focus, or maybe the gentle atmosphere just encourages curiosity about even the strangest topics. Whatever the reason, it creates a space where deep dives into literature are as welcome as tall tales about mules. Across the room, a different group is discussing something far less poetic, but just as engaging: neighborhood gossip. Someone whispers about a local merchant who tried watering down his coffee beans to increase his profits. The room reacts with a collective horrified gasp: watering down coffee in a coffee house. This is basically the 16th century equivalent of a major food scandal. Another man chimes in, claiming the merchant was only caught because his customers started falling asleep halfway through their conversations, instead of just halfway through their naps. I can't confirm if this story is true, but the widespread laughter suggests it's a well-loved piece of local lore. It's these little moments of shared humor and outrage that build a sense of community. A traveler seated near the doorway adds a quirky historical tidbit. He explains that in some cities, coffee houses have already started developing regular groups of patrons who meet daily. These informal communities become so close that members refer to each other almost like family. Regular seats are claimed, regular debates are had. Regular inside jokes develop that only the usual crowd fully understands. In other words, these coffee houses are becoming early versions of what we might call third places, those essential social spaces outside of home and work where life naturally unfolds. Historians still argue about whether the Ottoman coffeehouse was the very first institution of its kind, or simply the most successful version of something humans have always needed. But looking around, it's clear the formula works: coffee, comfortable seating, and time. Lots and lots of time. Just then, I noticed the man who had been napping earlier is stirring awake. He blinks slowly, glances around the room, and instinctively reaches for his cup, even though it's empty. A nearby patron sees this and gestures silently to the coffee brewer. A few moments later, a fresh, steaming cup arrives at the sleepy man's table. He smiles gratefully and takes a careful sip. Within seconds, his eyes brighten, as if someone just turned up the dimmer switch in his mind. "Perfect," he murmurs, his voice full of contentment. The gentle hum of the room continues around us. Someone quotes another line of poetry. Someone else wins a backgammon match with a triumphant clap. And another patron insists that the shape in their coffee cup is clearly a horse, which apparently means success in business is on its way. No one seems particularly worried about whether that interpretation is correct. Because the real magic of the coffee house isn't about fortune-telling or winning debates. It's about the simple, profound act of sharing time together. I lean back in my seat, listening to the overlapping conversations and the soft clink of cups against saucers. Outside, the city is a whirlwind of trade, politics, and empire building. But in here, people linger, they talk, they listen, they drift between wakefulness and rest, powered by the dark, fragrant brew, and somewhere between the stories, the poetry, and the quiet laughter. The Ottoman coffee house perfects one of humanity's most underrated arts, the art of a really good afternoon conversation. Thanks for joining me on this little trip back in time. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The afternoon continues its slow, comfortable slide toward evening, and you begin to notice that the coffee house is attracting more than just casual wanderers. A new group enters the room, and their presence shifts the atmosphere ever so slightly. They are dressed differently from the merchants and apprentices already seated here, taller boots. More structured clothing, the quiet posture of men used to discipline. They sit together near the wall, speaking in low voices, while accepting their cups of coffee with polite nods. You've just witnessed another stage in the evolution of the Ottoman coffee house, because once a place becomes popular enough, eventually the authorities start paying attention. One well-established historical fact is that by the late 16th century, coffee houses had spread rapidly across Istanbul, becoming gathering places for people of many professions, including soldiers, scholars, merchants, and government officials. And where large groups gather regularly, the empire naturally becomes curious. At first, the attention from above is mostly observational. Ottoman officials begin hearing reports about these new establishments where men sit for hours discussing poetry, politics, and occasionally the shocking laziness of certain donkeys. On the surface, nothing seems particularly threatening, but coffee houses possess a quiet power that slowly becomes obvious. Information spreads quickly here. News travels faster than caravans. Opinions bounce between tables like backgammon pieces. And sometimes those opinions involve the government. Historians still argue whether the earliest Ottoman rulers immediately recognized this potential, or if it took several decades before coffee houses were viewed as politically significant. Either way, someone in authority eventually realizes something important. If you want to know what people are thinking, you should probably listen where they talk the most. Back in the coffee house, the new group of men settles into their bench seats. One of them glances around the room with calm curiosity while sipping his coffee. He's not interrupting anyone, he's just observing. Across the room, the regulars continue their conversations, seemingly unconcerned. A storyteller has begun recounting a humorous incident involving a bureaucrat who accidentally signed the wrong document and spent 2 weeks approving shipments of turnips to the Navy. The room laughs. One of the newly arrived men raises an eyebrow slightly. Was that story just harmless comedy or subtle criticism? Coffee houses blur those lines. A quirky historical tidbit from Ottoman records suggests that some early coffeehouse debates could become surprisingly bold. Patrons might speculate about policy decisions, trade laws, or even the behavior of certain officials. Not loudly, not aggressively, but the discussions happen. And because they happen in public, they ripple outward. One person hears an idea, another carries it to a different neighborhood. By the next afternoon, the same conversation might be unfolding in a completely different coffee house across the city. You notice the observer among the new arrivals quietly asking the coffee brewer a question. How long has this place been open? The brewer shrugs politely. A few months, and the crowd, every day, he replies. The observer nods slowly. You can almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Coffee houses are multiplying. People gather in them daily, and the conversations inside are unpredictable. Historians still debate exactly how concerned Ottoman authorities initially became about coffeehouse culture. Some rulers tolerated them. Others viewed them with suspicion. But everyone agrees that by the late 1500s, the empire was paying attention. Inside the room, though, the mood remains relaxed. The philosophical debate from earlier has now evolved into something slightly stranger. One patron insists that coffee sharpens the mind so effectively that it might one day allow people to stay awake for entire nights discussing mathematics. Another listener responds calmly, "That sounds terrible. Everyone nods in agreement. Nearby, the backgammon board has attracted a small audience. Each move produces a satisfying click of wood against wood. Players pause between turns to sip coffee or comment on a nearby story. Someone suggests a clever move. The player ignores it and makes a completely different move instead. The advisor sighs dramatically. Coffeehouse strategy advice, it seems, is optional. Meanwhile, the man who had been observing the room finishes his cup slowly. He listens to the debates, the laughter, the gossip about merchants and caravans, and possibly the occasional mild criticism of government decisions. Eventually, he stands, nods politely to the room, and leaves with his companions. The conversations barely pause. Another pot of coffee bubbles quietly over the coals. A man near the window stretches and yawns. Another patron flips his empty cup upside down to examine the grounds for signs of future travel. Life inside the coffeehouse continues exactly as before, but somewhere beyond the door, word will travel upward. Reports will reach officials. And sooner or later, someone very powerful will begin asking an important question. Is coffee simply a drink? Or is it the fuel for something far more interesting? For now, though, none of that tension has reached this peaceful room. The benches remain full. The conversations remain gentle. And somewhere near the back wall, someone has once again managed to fall asleep halfway through a discussion about poetry proving that even. Under the watchful curiosity of the empire, the ancient art of the afternoon nap remains undefeated. By late afternoon, the soft light streaming through the windows has turned golden, casting long stripes across the wooden floor. Shadows stretch lazily over the benches, blending with the faint haze of coffee, steam, and tobacco smoke. You notice that the room feels almost like a living creature, breathing with the gentle rhythm of conversation, laughter, and the occasional sigh of contentment from someone reclining against a wall. It's at this stage that the first whispers of official interference begin to creep into the scene. One well-documented historical fact is that the Ottoman authorities periodically attempted to impose bans on coffee and coffeehouses. The first known prohibition occurred in 1580 under Sultan Murad III, who reportedly feared that these spaces could foster sedition and idle gossip that might threaten the state. You sip your coffee carefully and watch the regulars continue their usual routines, completely unconcerned with distant imperial decrees. In the far corner, a man naps peacefully, unaware that his very act of resting in a coffeehouse is technically under scrutiny. The bans are fascinating, in part because they are paradoxical. Coffee itself isn't illegal, it's just the spaces where people congregate that are of concern. Authorities worry less about the beverage and more about the gathering, men sharing ideas, debating policies, and occasionally criticizing officials over strongly scented cups of coffee. Historians still argue whether these bans were motivated more by moral concerns, idle chatter, excessive lounging, or by genuine fear of political dissent brewing among the citizenry. In any case, enforcement is sporadic at best. Sometimes inspectors arrive and quietly observe the patrons. Other times, soldiers show up to scatter a crowd, leaving behind only the faint aroma of roasted beans and confusion. And yet, the coffeehouse persists. It adapts. Patrons find clever ways to continue their meetings. They shift hours, use different entrances, or spread out into smaller groups to avoid drawing attention. The caffeine-fueled commitment to socializing proves remarkably resilient. One quirky historical tidbit is that some coffeehouses reportedly remained open during bans by displaying a sign that they were selling something entirely different, like sherbet or sweets, while still quietly serving coffee inside. It's early Ottoman innovation at its finest. The art of subtle rebellion flavored with cardamom. Back at your bench, a group of merchants debates trade routes. One insists that coffee from Yemen tastes superior, while another swears by beans from Aleppo. Their argument escalates into mock insults, and finally, someone slaps the table in theatrical frustration, sending their small cup tipping slightly. The coffeehouse continues, uninterrupted. Somewhere near the fireplace, a janissary leans back against the wall. Soldiers like him adopt coffeehouses as unofficial gathering spots, blending in with merchants and scholars while discussing politics, gossip, and occasionally the tactical merits of backgammon strategies. Their presence adds an understated authority to the room, yet they seem just as susceptible to the pull of conversation and naps as anyone else. And the poetic side of coffeehouse culture flourishes alongside all of this. Patrons recite verses from Persian and Arabic poets, sometimes improvising lines inspired by the foam in their cups or the aroma drifting through the room. One young man recites a few lines about the fleeting nature of life and the comforting permanence of a well-made brew, prompting quiet nods of agreement and murmured approval. Historians still debate how integral coffeehouses were to the spread of literary culture in the Ottoman Empire. Some argue they were essential, while others suggest that literary traditions would have persisted through private salons and educational institutions anyway. Either way, the coffeehouse becomes a hub where words, ideas, and aromas circulate freely. You notice a pattern emerging. The coffeehouse thrives because it combines several complementary pleasures: taste, conversation, community, and rest. People come for the drink, but stay for the company and the rhythm of lingering. Even under imperial scrutiny, this delicate ecosystem continues to flourish, demonstrating the remarkable social power of coffee. And in the back, the nap continues. The gentle breathing of one patron, slow and steady, reminds everyone that while coffee energizes, the culture of pause remains a cornerstone of Ottoman life. Caffeine and calm coexist here, perfectly balanced, a paradox that outsiders continue to marvel at even centuries later. As the day fades, you sip your final cup, feeling the warmth spreading through your chest. Outside, the city moves on, but inside, time has softened. Conversation, stories, poetry, and the faint hum of thought drift gently together. Even with the threat of bans, the coffeehouse is a space designed to endure. Its subtle power isn't about rebellion alone, it's about creating a rhythm. A pause in the day, a moment of gentle community that persists no matter what. As evening settles over Istanbul, the bustling marketplace outside begins to quiet down. But inside the coffeehouse, a gentle, persistent hum of energy remains, a warm glow against the fading daylight. You take a sip of your coffee and notice how the room has subtly transformed. People who arrived hours ago are still here, their legs stretched out, backs leaning comfortably against the walls, lost in a tapestry of overlapping conversations. By the late 16th century, these coffeehouses weren't just places to grab a drink. They were vital social hubs in Ottoman cities. People would gather for hours, from morning until late evening, to share news, ideas, and of course, coffee. Imagine a single room where so many different worlds could coexist. In one corner, a fortune teller studies the grounds left in a cup, a practice known as tasseography. He murmurs predictions about journeys and business, and even something oddly specific, like losing a sandal on the way home. His audience listens with a mix of seriousness and amusement. Historians debate how common this was, but it certainly added a layer of mystique and fun to the atmosphere. Nearby, a poet recites verses of love and longing, his voice floating through the room. A young apprentice might offer a clever rhyming couplet in response, sparking a playful, spontaneous exchange that ends in soft laughter. It wasn't just about high-minded intellectual debate. It was also a space for creativity and lightheartedness to flourish. As the evening deepens, the energy of the room shifts again, slowing down. Janissaries, who were once alert and watchful, now lean back in relaxation. Merchants pause their arguments about trade routes. Students close their books. Someone might yawn, stretch, and settle against the wall for a quick nap, their soft snores blending into the gentle murmur of conversation. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Ottoman coffee house, the unspoken etiquette that allowed for so many different activities to happen at once. You could engage in a heated debate, listen to a story, play a game, or simply drift off to sleep. Every choice was respected. This created a culture of coexistence that was truly remarkable for such crowded urban spaces. Historians are still captivated by how seamlessly these different layers of interaction, intellectual, playful, and restful, were woven together. And the coffee itself was at the heart of a beautiful ritual. The sez, the traditional coffee pot, would be carefully tended to. The rich foam would rise before being poured into tiny, delicate cups. Sugar and spices were offered with a quiet grace. Even the steam seemed to move with intention, curling lazily through the air as if respecting the room's unique rhythm of conversation and calm. Did the coffeehouse owners deliberately design this perfect balance of energy and rest? Or did it just emerge naturally from the unique combination of caffeine and human nature? We may never know for sure, but the result was undeniably harmonious. It was a place that could hold high-energy discussions, deep thought, and peaceful naps all at the same time, without any friction. Looking around, you can see the patterns. Regulars have their favorite spots, creating a sense of familiarity. Newcomers are either gently welcomed into conversations or left to observe in peace. The narratives unfold in layers. Serious political debates mix with exaggerated tales from distant caravans, poetry, recitations, and those quiet little micronaps. The whole scene feels both structured and beautifully spontaneous. The air itself tells a story filled with the rich scents of roasted coffee beans, warm wood, cardamom, and a faint hint of tobacco smoke. This sensory cocoon grounds everyone in the room. You start to realize that the coffee house is more than just a place. It's a living ecosystem. It's where human habits, aromas, and sounds all come together to create a strong, enduring social fabric. A cup of coffee here is an invitation to linger, to connect, to rest, and to feel like you belong. While the city outside transitions from day to night, time inside the coffee house feels fluid and malleable. Conversations, daydreams, naps, and laughter all weave together into a single, continuous experience. Here, the stimulating effects of caffeine and the profound sense of calm coexist in perfect harmony, creating a foundation for hours of meaningful human connection. The Ottoman Coffee House achieved a level of social sophistication. You can almost taste in every sippa masterful orchestration of energy, pause, and community. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories. See you next time. Night begins to descend outside the coffee house, draping the city in deep indigo and muted gold streetlights. The hustle of the market has faded completely, replaced by the soft echo of footsteps and the occasional clip-clop of a lone donkey returning home. Inside, the coffee house is still alive, though in a gentler, more contemplative way. Conversations now carry a slower cadence, like waves that rise and fall more softly as the room adjusts to the evening lull. You notice that the patterns of social behavior have shifted subtly over the course of the day. Early arrivals, the merchants, the students, the storytellers have gradually become intertwined in a shared rhythm of sipping, talking, observing, and occasionally dozing. Regulars recognize each other's habitual gestures, the way one leans back to sip. Another sets their cup just so, or the subtle nod that signals agreement or attention. These small cues allow for a shared, almost unspoken understanding that keeps the room flowing harmoniously. One historical fact is that Ottoman coffee houses quickly became key sites of intellectual exchange. Scholars, poets, merchants, and even bureaucrats gathered here to discuss ideas, recite poetry, and debate philosophy. The informal, relaxed setting encouraged free-flowing conversation that might have been impossible in a formal madrasa or government office. You watch as a poet improvises a verse inspired by the glowing coals of the sez. Each line unfolds with careful rhythm, drawing nods, murmurs of approval, and soft laughter from his audience. A merchant interrupts briefly to offer a witty observation, which then sparks a light-hearted debate about who saw the largest camel on a recent caravan route. The topics span serious matters, playful exaggeration, and even minor gossip about neighboring districts, forming a rich mosaic of discussion. Historians still argue how directly these exchanges influenced broader Ottoman intellectual life. Did debates in coffee houses spark significant political ideas, or did they merely mirror pre-existing discourses? Either way, their role as social incubators is undeniable. And then, as if in silent coordination, another familiar ritual emerges: micro-napping. Several patrons lean back against the walls or benches, eyes closing gently. One man in particular, who had been engaged in a spirited discussion minutes earlier, rests his head lightly on his arms. His breathing slows, merging with the low hum of conversation and occasional clink of cups. It's a delicate balance of alertness and repose, the signature rhythm of the Ottoman. Coffee house afternoon, stretching into evening. One quirky historical tidbit stands out. Some coffee houses offered small pieces of sweet pastry or dried fruit to accompany the drink, enhancing both flavor and the social experience. Patrons might nibble while listening to debates or reciting poetry, adding a subtle gastronomic rhythm to the room's auditory and olfactory textures. It's a multi-sensory ecosystem designed for lingering taste, smell, sound, and the gentle tactile comfort of benches and cushions. The sez bubbles quietly over the coals, releasing a soft, nutty aroma into the warm air. Another patron slowly pours himself a fresh cup, watching the foam rise to the rim like a miniature cloud. Conversations continue in soft layers. The debate about poetry, the gossip about merchants, the faint rumble of laughter, the quiet tapping of a backgammon board. Each element interweaves seamlessly, forming the intricate social tapestry of the space. Historians still debate the exact balance of caffeine-induced alertness and ambient relaxation that made Ottoman coffeehouses so enduring. Was it the stimulant that encouraged conversation, or the slow pace, the comfortable seating, and social norms that made extended presence appealing? Likely, it was all of these factors combined, creating an environment where hours could pass unnoticed, yet meaningfully. As you watch, a young apprentice sets his cup down and stretches, yawning softly. A poet recites a final verse, punctuated by gentle applause. Even the micronappers shift slightly in response to a subtle draft from the open door. The room's rhythm adapts naturally to the dwindling light and energy, maintaining a gentle equilibrium where alertness, conversation, and rest coalesce. And in this quiet complexity, you begin to see the genius of the Ottoman coffeehouse, a space deliberately ordinary yet profoundly orchestrated, capable of sustaining community, debate, relaxation, and storytelling all. While steeped in the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, it's not just a place to drink, it's a space to inhabit time itself. As night deepens, the coffee house transforms. The afternoon's lively chaos has mellowed into a measured, almost ritualistic hum. Flickering coals cast long dancing shadows across the walls, mingling with the golden glow from oil lamps. The light paints the patrons' faces with warmth, shifting with every flicker. The room feels calmer now, yet alive in a subtler, more intimate way. Every sound seems to find its place in the evening's rhythm. The faint clink of a cup against its saucer, the soft shuffle of a backgammon piece on a wooden board, the quiet whisper of turning pages. They all weave together into a layered, almost musical cadence that guides the flow of the night. By the early 17th century, places like this had become vital social institutions throughout Istanbul and beyond. Historians often call them the centers of public life. Here, you'd find people from every walk of life, merchants and scholars, janissaries and poets, and weary travelers, all seeking connection or a moment of quiet observation. The coffeehouse had grown from its humble street stall beginnings into an essential hub for daily life. As you become more absorbed in the space, you start to see the patterns. A man stirs his cup with deliberate slowness, watching the foam rise just so before taking a careful sip. Another leans back against the wall, his eyes closed for a moment, not sleeping, but simply absorbing the sounds of the room. Near the center, a storyteller is in his element, leaning forward to deliver a long, winding tale about a camel caravan navigating treacherous Anatolian passes. He fills the story with exaggerated peril and heroic mules, and his audience hangs on every word, nodding and murmuring their reactions at just the right moments. Historians still debate the political role of the coffeehouse in Ottoman society. Did it actively shape political discourse, or did it just reflect the existing social order? Some argue that having janissaries and bureaucrats sitting alongside common merchants created a unique forum for informal debate. Others claim it was mainly a cultural and recreational space, but no one denies its incredible significance as a place where people simply met. And as you look closer, you spot the little rituals, the quirky details that make this place what it is. A small group of regulars has a subtle system for deciding whose turn it is to buy the next round of coffee. One of them leans over to whisper instructions to a newcomer, who nods solemnly as if he's receiving ancient, sacred wisdom. These small acts, repeated day after day, form the unwritten rules of etiquette, the social glue that holds the coffeehouse together. The air itself is thick with aromas. Freshly ground coffee beans and cardamom mingle with the faint, oily scent of the lamps. This sensory environment is deliberately calming. You can see its effect on the patrons. Voices soften, movements slow down, and even the habitual nappers, like the man resting in the back corner, seem to breathe more evenly, lulled by the gentle ambience. The backgammon boards are in full swing. Players tap their pieces against the wooden surfaces, their game punctuated by whispered banter about strategy, little jokes, and friendly boasts. Even when a player loses, the mood stays light. The loss is simply absorbed into the social fabric of the evening rather than creating any tension. The game isn't just a game. It's another part of the communal rhythm of lingering conversation and gentle engagement. Did the coffeehouse owners deliberately structure these activities, the games, the poetry, the storytelling, or did they just emerge naturally from people being people? Historians argue about this too, but either way, their coexistence creates a dynamic, multi-layered experience. You have mental stimulation, social interaction, and ambient relaxation, all happening at the same time. Nearby, a man leans back with his cup, eyes half closed, listening to a debate about the relative merits of coffee beans from Yemen versus those from Aleppo. Another patron interrupts a story, pointing out a small inconsistency about a recently returned caravan. And somewhere between the lively conversation, the recited poetry, and the faint snore of a sleeper, the coffeehouse has become a living, breathing organism. Each person's actions ripple through the space, subtly influencing the tone, the pace, and the mood in a way you can feel. As the night wears on, you begin to understand the unique power of this place. The coffeehouse offers more than just caffeine. It offers a structure for human interaction without being rigid. It's a space for quiet observation, for storytelling, for intellectual play, and for restorative rest. It embodies a perfect paradox: energy and repose, coexisting, caffeine and calm entwined, conversation and contemplation living in harmony. And in that delicate interplay, you realize why these spaces would endure for centuries. The Ottoman coffeehouse isn't just a building where people drink coffee. It's a cultivated ecosystem of time, senses, and social rhythm, perfected over hundreds of years through small, careful adaptations. It's a testament to our timeless need for a place to simply be together. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories from the past. See you next time. Night deepens further, and the city outside the coffeehouse becomes almost dreamlike. Lanterns flicker along the cobbled streets, casting moving patterns over walls and doorways. You notice how the muffled sounds of late commerce and distant footsteps form a quiet, complementary backdrop to the gentle hum inside. In this cocoon of warmth and quiet activity, the coffeehouse feels entirely separate from the bustle beyond a microcosm where time bends, stretches, and softens under the influence of roasted beans and conversation. A historical fact worth noting is that by the early 17th century, Ottoman coffeehouses had spread not only in Istanbul, but across the empire, including Anatolia, the Balkans, and parts of the Middle East. They became standardized in many ways: simple seating arrangements, low tables, the central focus on brewing and serving coffee, and an atmosphere that encouraged lingering over hours of conversation. These traits weren't universal, of course, but a recognizable pattern had emerged. From your bench, you watch interactions unfold with a near-scientific fascination. A young merchant explains the pricing of imported spices, gesturing delicately over the foam of his cup. A janissary seated nearby listens, nodding occasionally, but his mind clearly wanders to tactical scenarios from his military training. Across the room, a poet improvises a short couplet about dusk, prompting a wave of soft laughter and murmured approval. The variety of engagements coexisting within a single room is astonishing. Historians still argue whether the coffeehouse's primary function was social, cultural, or even political. Some emphasize the recreational and literary aspects, while others suggest that informal networks and rumor dissemination played a subtle but real role in shaping urban life and even governance. Either interpretation underscores the coffeehouse as a hub of human interaction, unlike any other space of the period. You notice a quirky detail. A group of patrons has invented a subtle hand gesture system to indicate whose turn it is to tell a story or recite poetry. A raised finger here, a slight nod there, all silently coordinating the flow of conversation and participation. It's a microcosm of social choreography honed through daily repetition and shared understanding. The scent of the room has deepened as well. Cardamom mixes with the faintly smoky aroma of burning coals, forming a comforting olfactory cocoon. Even those who are awake move more deliberately. Gestures are slow, measured, and careful now. One spills coffee, and laughter is warm rather than harsh. There is a quiet respect for shared space, a tacit understanding that this environment is designed for lingering observation and gentle engagement. A backgammon match continues near the window, each tap of wood against wood timed as though to punctuate the ongoing conversation rather than interrupt it. Patrons occasionally glance at the board, make a brief comment, and return to their stories or philosophical debates. The room hums with multiple simultaneous rhythms, caffeine-fueled alertness, the relaxed pace of micronaps, playful competition, and thoughtful discussion. Historians still debate the extent to which coffeehouses actively encouraged intellectual and artistic innovation versus serving as reflective mirrors of existing societal interests. Regardless, the pattern is evident. These spaces allowed for repeated, layered interactions that strengthened community bonds, spread ideas, and offered restorative pauses in a bustling urban environment. A man who had been napping against the far wall now stirs. His movements are slow and deliberate. He sits upright, stretches, and takes a careful sip of freshly poured coffee. Another sip, and he's alert, ready to contribute again to a soft debate about poetry, commerce, or possibly the merits of Aleppo versus Yemeni beans. The room adjusts to his renewed presence seamlessly, as though everyone knew this rhythm was coming. By now, you begin to sense the subtle genius of this environment. It is simultaneously structured and unstructured, a place for conversation without obligation, for rest without embarrassment, for playful debate without conflict. It's a living system, sustained by the repeated mindful actions of its patrons and the sensory environment they share. The Sezev continues to bubble quietly over the coals, a tiny sun at the heart of this human ecosystem. Steam curls lazily toward the ceiling, mingling with the faint smoke from a nearby pipe. In the middle of the room, a storyteller leans forward, narrating a tale so intricate that it prompts laughter, speculation, and mild disagreement in equal measure. You sip your cup, watching the patterns of human interaction unfold like a carefully choreographed dance. Simultaneously spontaneous and remarkably balanced, the Ottoman coffeehouse, you realize, has perfected the art of human pacing. Caffeine, conversation, rest, and play, coexisting in perfect harmony. It is a space where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, simply through the deliberate orchestration of everyday actions. A social laboratory whose effects ripple quietly across the empire. The night wears on, and the coffeehouse settles into a deeper rhythm. The soft golden glow from the lamps merges with the dimming shadows along the walls, casting everyone in an almost cinematic light. You notice how each patron seems to inhabit a comfortable personal bubble, yet they are simultaneously connected to the hum of the room. Cups clink softly, breaths pause and resume. A backgammon piece slides across the board with deliberate care. Conversation continues, gentle but insistent, weaving through the space like smoke curling from a sesbeh. One historical fact is that Ottoman coffeehouses quickly developed into multi-purpose social hubs. By the early 17th century, they were not just for drinking coffee, they were spaces for storytelling, poetry, games, fortune-telling, informal learning, and political discussion. Patrons spent hours lingering, with no rigid structure, creating a rhythm that balanced leisure, socialization, and subtle intellectual engagement. You watch a familiar scene unfold. A man recounts the exploits of a recently returned caravan, embellishing stories with exaggerated heroics and perilous mishaps. His audience leans in, occasionally laughing, occasionally offering minor corrections, yet all remain engaged. Across the room, a poet improvises a few lines inspired by the glowing coals, drawing nods of approval and murmurs of amusement. Somewhere near the back, a man naps, his breathing slow and steady, a gentle counterpoint to the ongoing energy. Historians still argue about the social impact of these coffeehouses. Did they actively foster dissent? Or were they simply reflective of the cultural and intellectual interests already present in Ottoman society? Either way, they became essential spaces for informal communication, allowing ideas, observations, and gossip to flow freely, largely unsupervised. A quirky historical tidbit emerges from the room. Some patrons begin small competitions of storytelling, wagering small sums or sweets on whose narrative is more elaborate or entertaining. These contests are entirely informal, but they add a playful layer to the social environment, encouraging creativity, wit, and memory. Even the nappers occasionally stir in reaction to a particularly dramatic flourish. The aroma of coffee, cardamom, and faint pipe smoke envelops the room, creating a sensory atmosphere that encourages lingering. Movements are slow and considered, voices soften, gestures become gentle punctuation to ongoing conversation. The entire space seems orchestrated by an unspoken rhythm, balancing human energy with rest, dialogue with observation, and caffeine with calm. You notice the interaction between regulars and newcomers. Habitual patrons guide new arrivals, showing them seating, explaining subtle social cues, and occasionally directing attention to ongoing debates or poetry recitations. This gentle onboarding strengthens community bonds and reinforces the continuity of the space's social ecosystem. Backgammon boards remain in play, but games unfold slowly, almost meditatively. Each piece's movement punctuates conversations without overshadowing them. Laughter and murmurs blend seamlessly with the ambient clinking of wood, forming a layered soundtrack of communal engagement. Historians still debate whether these overlapping activitous games debate poetry. Naps were intentionally structured or emerged naturally from human behavior. The result, however, is undeniably effective. A single room accommodates diverse social needs, blending mental stimulation, cultural expression, relaxation, and interpersonal bonding. Outside, Istanbul's streets are quieting into deep night, yet inside, the coffeehouse pulses with quiet vitality. Patrons sip coffee slowly, share stories, nap strategically, and observe one another with relaxed attention. Each action resonates subtly through the room, reinforcing a shared sense of pace and purpose. You realize the genius of this environment lies in its orchestration of ordinary elements: benches, coffee, light, conversation, and rest. Individually simple, collectively profound. The Ottoman coffeehouse has evolved into a living organism, where sensory cues, social norms, and human behavior interact seamlessly, producing hours of unhurried engagement and quiet delight. By now, the evening has settled into a deep, comforting rhythm. The outside world, the streets, the markets, the distant calls of merchants faded into a soft backdrop of night. Inside the coffeehouse, the glow of lamps and the gentle flicker of coals create a warm cocoon, inviting patrons to slow even further, sip more deliberately, and listen with unhurried attention. The room hums softly, a layered blend of conversation, laughter, and the occasional gentle snore from those who have surrendered to the perfect micronap. A well-known historical fact is that coffeehouses by this time were firmly established as social and cultural hubs across the Ottoman Empire. Beyond merely serving coffee, they functioned as spaces for intellectual debate, storytelling, games, poetry, and casual discussion, fostering an environment where ideas could circulate freely among a diverse group of patrons. You notice the subtle choreography of the room. A storyteller leans forward, emphasizing gestures for effect, while listeners tilt their heads in unison, absorbing the tale. Nearby, a poet improvises lines inspired by the aroma of the coffee, prompting soft nods and whispered commentary. A man in the far corner, who had been asleep moments earlier, now stirs slightly, adjusting his cushion before resuming his attentive listening. Historians still debate the degree to which coffeehouses facilitated political discourse versus purely personal interaction, while some assert that informal networks within these spaces subtly influenced urban life and policy discussions. Others maintain that the primary function remained social and leisurely. Either perspective highlights the importance of coffeehouses as unique social ecosystems. A quirky detail emerges. A small cluster of patrons engages in what seems like an unspoken ritual, passing a tiny spoon from cup to cup, measuring a pinch of sugar or a sprinkle of cardamom, silently coordinating their tasting experience. These micro-rituals reinforce social bonds, subtly signaling familiarity, respect, and shared appreciation for coffee craftsmanship. The sensory environment contributes significantly to the atmosphere. The rich, nutty aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingles with cardamom and the faint smoke from a nearby pipe, creating a warm, enveloping haze. Each sip, each movement, each gesture contributes to the gentle cadence of the room, encouraging reflection, conversation, and, when necessary, short, restorative naps. The backgammon boards still occupy corner tables, but games proceed deliberately. Each move an understated punctuation in the broader symphony of sound. Laughter, debate, whispered commentary, and the soft shuffling of pieces create a multi-layered soundtrack of engagement and gentle activity. Historians still argue whether these layered activities were intentionally designed to cultivate prolonged social interaction or emerged naturally from the habits of regular patrons. Regardless, the effect is harmonious. A single room accommodates dynamic conversation, playful competition, reflective observation, and restorative pause simultaneously. You notice the balance between alertness and relaxation as patrons sip coffee, share stories, and occasionally close their eyes for a brief moment. Even the occasional dozing is respected, as the room seems to acknowledge these small lapses as integral to the rhythm of social life. The coffee house demonstrates an extraordinary social orchestration: ordinary objects and actions benches, cups, coals, conversation, rest combined into a sophisticated system that sustains human interaction, creativity, and relaxation. By nightfall, you realize that the Ottoman coffee house is more than a building or a beverage. Is a living, breathing ecosystem, a carefully balanced environment that orchestrates hours of unhurried engagement, subtly influencing the social life of an empire. As the night deepens, the coffee house seems to settle into its own quiet, nocturnal heartbeat. The lamps cast long, flickering shadows that dance across the wooden floor. Look at the coals in the sezd. They're glowing like embers in a tiny personal hearth. Outside, the sounds of Istanbul have almost faded to silence, but in here, the room maintains a gentle pulse. It's a soft mixture of conversation, quiet laughter, the clinking of cups, and the occasional shuffle of a backgammon piece on a wooden board. You start to notice how every sound, every small movement fits seamlessly into this overall rhythm, creating a sense of ordered, profound relaxation. This isn't just a random gathering. By the mid-17th century, coffee houses like this one had become deeply entrenched as the epicenters of social interaction throughout Ottoman urban life. Historically, they were often gender-segregated spaces, predominantly for men. Here, patrons could discuss everything from politics and poetry to religion, business, and the daily news, all over a cup of rich, dark coffee. While their main purpose was leisure, they gradually transformed into informal forums for debate, intellectual exchange, and powerful community building. Watch closely, and you'll see a familiar pattern emerge. A storyteller leans forward, gesturing emphatically with his hands, recounting tales of ancient caravans, faraway towns, and sometimes wonderfully absurd heroics. The patrons around him listen intently, interjecting with small comments or exaggerated exclamations, completely engaged in the narrative he's weaving. Over in another corner, a poet is improvising verses, inspired by the evening light and the scent of coffee wafting through the air. His words prompt nods of approval, murmured praise, and even the occasional humorous interruption. Meanwhile, a few other patrons are leaning back against the walls or benches, their eyes closing for brief moments of what you could call micro-napping, perfectly synchronized with the room's gentle overall cadence. Historians today still argue about the true role of these coffee houses. Did they primarily encourage political engagement, or did they simply mirror the existing social and intellectual currents of the time? Some scholars suggest that the informal discussions held within these walls could subtly influence public opinion, or act as channels for spreading rumors and news. Others maintain that the coffee house remained, for the most part, a recreational space. But either way you look at it, both perspectives emphasize its undeniable significance as a hub for communication and social cohesion. And then you notice a quirky little detail. One patron has started sketching small figures and patterns on scraps of paper. He shows them to his nearby friends, seeking their approval or just trying to get a laugh. These impromptu drawings become conversation starters, sparking playful debates over artistic merit or the stories behind the sketches. It's a minor thing, but it's a revealing example of how creativity integrates so seamlessly into the life of the coffee house. Every little act contributes to the whole. The air itself is thick with experience. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingles with the warm spice of cardamom and the faint, sweet scent of pipe smoke, creating a rich, comforting sensory environment. The patrons respond to this atmosphere naturally. Their movements are slow and deliberate. Their voices are gentle. Even the occasional sigh, a stretch, or a yawn seems to blend harmoniously into the overall rhythm of the room, reinforcing this unique atmosphere of measured comfort. The backgammon games continue with soft, deliberate clicks as the pieces are moved across the board. The moves are made thoughtfully, and discussions about strategy are whispered between players. Spectators chime in occasionally with their own subtle commentary. The games punctuate the ongoing conversations without ever dominating them, reinforcing the layered, intricate social ecosystem of the coffee house. Historians also debate whether these overlapping activities, the games, debates, poetry, storytelling, and even the micronaps were deliberately structured, or if they simply emerged organically from the repeated behaviors of the patrons over time. Regardless of the answer, the effect is remarkably balanced. Here is a single space that accommodates intellectual engagement, social interaction, playful diversion, and restorative rest, all at the same time. From your vantage point, you can see the natural rhythm of alertness and repose that's maintained throughout the room. Patrons sip their coffee, they share stories, they offer commentary. And then they might drift into a brief nap, all without ever disrupting the collective harmony. The coffee house operates almost like a living organism, orchestrating human behavior, sensory input, and social interaction into an elegant, enduring system that just works. And as the night reaches its deepest point, you finally grasp the full genius of the Ottoman Coffeehouse. It is so much more than just a place to drink coffee. It is a carefully evolved ecosystem that masterfully balances energy, conversation, and rest, offering hours of sustained, unhurried engagement. It is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. It's a structure built from everyday objects and actions, yet it's been transformed into a sophisticated environment for human interaction, cultural expression, and a subtle yet profound intellectual development. It's a testament to a different pace of life, a different way of being together. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of the Ottoman Coffeehouse. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this. See you next time. The night stretches on, and a subtle hush begins to settle over the coffeehouse. The clinking of cups has softened, and even the laughter now emerges in quiet ripples rather than bursts. The coals in the seize glow warmly, casting an amber haze across the benches and walls. And the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingles with faint traces of cardamom and pipe smoke. You notice how the room itself seems to breathe, expanding and contracting with the collective rhythm of conversation, observation, and rest. A historical fact to consider is that by the mid-17th century, coffeehouses had begun attracting a remarkably diverse clientele within the constraints of the era's gender norms. Scholars, artisans, merchants, soldiers, and poets all gathered in these spaces, each contributing to a layered social network. The interactions ranged from lighthearted games and gossip to serious intellectual debates and impromptu poetry recitals. You observe the delicate choreography of the space. A storyteller narrates a tale of a caravan journey across Anatolia, complete with exaggerated mishaps and heroic mules. Listeners react in waves laughter, murmurs, nods, and occasional corrections, all without breaking the room's gentle rhythm. Nearby, a poet improvises verses inspired by the shifting glow of the lamps and the rising steam from a fresh seize, eliciting subtle applause and whispered critiques. Some patrons lean back against benches or walls, surrendering to micro-naps that feel almost rehearsed, synchronized perfectly with the quiet pulses of conversation. Historians still debate how influential these discussions truly were on broader social or political life. Some suggest that coffeehouses served as informal arenas for the exchange of ideas that subtly influenced public sentiment, while others maintain that they were primarily recreational spaces, reflecting but not shaping societal norms. Either interpretation underscores the coffeehouse's role as a vital social hub. A quirky historical tidbit appears in a group of young apprentices. They have begun whispering predictions based on the foam in their coffee cups, debating whether certain patterns indicate travel, wealth, or simply an upcoming nap. These playful rituals, though lighthearted, reinforce social bonds and shared attention, highlighting the integration of whimsy and observation into daily routines. The backgammon boards continue their slow rhythm. Pieces click gently against the wood as players deliberate each move, punctuating conversations with subtle tension and release. Observers offer soft commentary or laughter, but the games never dominate. Instead, they interweave seamlessly with debates, stories, and micronaps. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman coffeehouse deliberately cultivated this multi-layered structure of activity, or whether it emerged organically from patron behavior. Regardless, the effect is clear. A single space can simultaneously accommodate intellectual engagement, social interaction, play, and rest. You notice that even newcomers instinctively adapt to the room's pace. They mirror the gentle cadence, lowering voices, leaning back, and observing rituals without instruction. The balance of alertness and repose seems almost contagious, a shared, unspoken understanding maintained by the collective presence of regulars. Outside, the city sleeps under a canopy of night, but inside, the coffeehouse hums quietly with life. Patrons sip coffee slowly, exchange soft remarks, and occasionally drift into brief, restorative rest. The delicate orchestration of sound, scent, movement, and human behavior transforms the space into a living, breathing ecosystem, perfectly attuned to sustaining long hours of engagement and relaxation. In this moment, you grasp the full elegance of the Ottoman coffeehouse, a place where ordinary objects and simple rituals combine to produce extraordinary social harmony. The interplay of caffeine, conversation, games, poetry, and rest forms a dynamic environment that nurtures human interaction, cultural expression, and intellectual curiosity, subtle masterpiece perfected over decades. The late-night hours settle over the coffeehouse like a soft, warm blanket. The glow from the oil lamps flickers against the walls, making the shadows dance lazily over benches and tables. Outside, the city is almost silent, the streets glimmering with the occasional reflection of distant lanterns. Inside, the hum of conversation, the faint clatter of backgammon pieces, and the gentle exhalations of napping patrons create a layered, almost hypnotic soundscape. You notice how every movement and sound seems to fit perfectly into the room's slow, deliberate rhythm. A historical fact worth noting is that by this stage, Ottoman coffeehouses were deeply integrated into urban life, functioning not only as spaces of leisure, but also as informal hubs for news exchange. Travelers, merchants, and locals would share information from distant provinces, discussing trade, politics, and cultural events. The coffeehouse became a place where knowledge flowed as freely as the coffee itself. You watch a poet seated near the hearth improvising verses inspired by the flickering coals and curling steam from a freshly brewed seize. Listeners murmur appreciation, occasionally offering small corrections or playful A merchant nearby recounts the day's journey to distant markets, embellishing minor details to elicit laughter. Across the room, a few patrons lean back against benches, eyes closed in micronaps that harmonize perfectly with the room's overall energy. Historians still argue how much influence these spaces had on political or social discourse. Some suggest that coffeehouses allowed informal discussions that subtly affected opinion formation, while others emphasize their primary function as spaces for leisure and cultural exchange. Either interpretation acknowledges the central role these establishments played in urban life. A quirky historical tidbit emerges from a small group of young apprentices observing fortune-telling practices. They eagerly interpret coffee grounds, debating which shapes indicate success, travel, or amusingly, the likelihood of a nap later in the evening. These playful rituals, though seemingly trivial, reinforce social bonds and reflect the whimsical side of coffeehouse culture. The backgammon boards are still active, pieces moving deliberately with soft clicks. Players discuss strategy quietly, occasionally chuckling at unexpected moves, but the games blend naturally into the broader social environment rather than dominating it. The gentle layering of activities, poetry, debate, storytelling, gaming, and rest creates a rich, multidimensional atmosphere. Historians still debate whether the Ottoman coffeehouse intentionally fostered this diversity of activity or if it emerged organically from patron behavior over time. Regardless, the result is a remarkably balanced space that accommodates intellectual engagement, social interaction, playful competition, and restorative rest simultaneously. You notice the subtle patterns of social learning. Newcomers quickly adapt to the room's rhythm, lowering their voices, pacing their gestures, and observing unspoken rules of engagement. Even small actions, like passing a spoon or nodding during a story, contribute to the fluid cooperative dynamic that defines the coffeehouse experience. The combined sensory environment aromas of coffee, cardamom, faint pipe smoke, the warmth of the lamps, and the tactile comfort of wooden benches and cushions creates a deeply immersive space. Movement, sound, and scent are harmonized, encouraging prolonged engagement while supporting rest. The Ottoman coffeehouse, in its intricate orchestration of ordinary elements, emerges as a living ecosystem, a place where human behavior, culture, and sensory input coalesce beautifully, allowing hours of unhurried, layered activity. By late evening, you understand why these coffeehouses endured. They were more than social spaces. They were carefully balanced environments, blending energy, .com, and human interaction in ways that continue to feel remarkably sophisticated centuries later. Here, caffeine, conversation, games, poetry, and rest coexist effortlessly, shaping a subtle yet profound culture of lingering. The night stretches even deeper, and the coffee house takes on a quiet, almost meditative glow. The amber light from the oil lamps dances across the walls, highlighting the subtle swirls of smoke rising from the center. You notice the faint creak of benches as patrons adjust their positions, the soft clink of spoons against cups, and the occasional sigh of contentment from someone reclining against a wall. The rhythm of the room feels deliberate and comforting, a symphony of small human movements unfolding in harmony. One historical fact is that Ottoman coffeehouses often encouraged sustained attendance. Patrons would spend hours, sometimes the majority of their day, lingering over multiple cups of coffee. This extended presence allowed for layered interactions, casual conversation, storytelling, poetry, games, and periods of rest, all interwoven into a subtle social ecosystem. You notice a storyteller near the hearth, recounting a tale of a merchant caravan navigating treacherous terrain. The narrative is punctuated with exaggerated mishaps and heroic animal companions, eliciting soft laughter and gentle applause from the listeners. Nearby, a poet improvises verses inspired by the rising steam and the warm glow of the lamps. A few patrons lean back, eyes closed for micronaps, perfectly synchronized with the natural pauses in conversation. Historians still debate whether coffeehouses functioned primarily as recreational spaces or as incubators for intellectual and political exchange. Some suggest they subtly shaped public opinion, while others argue that their primary value was cultural and social, reflecting existing trends rather than directing them. Either way, these establishments were central to urban Ottoman life. A quirky historical tidbit catches your attention. Some coffeehouse patrons would playfully assign narratives or predicted outcomes to patterns in the coffee grounds. One young apprentice insists a swirl indicates imminent travel, another sees wealth, and a third jokes it predicts another nap. These small rituals, though playful, reinforce social cohesion and shared attentiveness to detail. The backgammon boards continue their quiet rhythm. Each piece clicks softly as players deliberate moves, whispering strategy to nearby observers. The games don't dominate the room. Instead, they punctuate conversation, debate, and poetry with a gentle, complementary cadence. The layering of activities intellectual, playful, and restful, playful, multisensory environment that encourages patrons to linger. Historians still argue whether this interplay of games, poetry, storytelling, and naps was intentionally structured or emerged organically from patron behavior. Regardless, the effect is clear. The coffeehouse accommodates multiple forms of engagement simultaneously, sustaining a unique social ecosystem. You notice the subtle transmission of social norms. Newcomers instinctively adopt the room's gentle pace, modulating their voices, observing subtle cues, and participating in micro-rituals without explicit instruction. These shared patterns maintain the equilibrium of the coffeehouse, allowing a variety of activities to coexist harmoniously. The room's sensory environment, the warm glow of lamps, the aromatic blend of coffee and cardamom, the faint trace of pipe smoke creates an immersive, calming space. Movement, sound, and scent intertwine, facilitating prolonged engagement while supporting restorative rest. The Ottoman coffeehouse, through careful orchestration of ordinary elements, emerges as a living organism where human interaction, cultural expression, and leisure seamlessly intersect. By the deeper hours of night, the brilliance of this system is clear. Coffee, conversation, games, poetry, and rest coexist effortlessly. The coffeehouse is more than a physical space. It is a finely tuned ecosystem, balancing energy.com and social connectioner, quietly perfected cultural institution that continues to resonate through time. The night has settled over Istanbul, wrapping the streets in a deep, velvety darkness. But in here, it's a different world. This coffeehouse is a gentle cocoon, bathed in the soft amber glow of lamplight. You can see every swirl of smoke rising from the sez, delicate and almost hypnotic as it dances in the air. The room itself seems to breathe with a subtle, steady pulse. A quiet laugh from one corner, the faint click of a backgammon piece from another, the soft sigh of a patron taking a brief micronap. Every sound, every small movement fits perfectly into a rhythm that has been carefully cultivated over centuries in these Ottoman coffeehouses. It's fascinating to think that by the mid-17th century, Places just like this were the absolute heart of civic life in Istanbul and other major cities across the empire. These weren't just spots to grab a quick coffee. They were vibrant, informal hubs where everything circulated. News, radical ideas, local gossip, poetry, and fiery intellectual debates. Can you imagine? Merchants, scholars, soldiers, and poets all sharing the same benches, creating this incredibly rich and layered social ecosystem. Look over there, in that corner. A storyteller is completely lost in his tale. His gestures dramatic as he describes a caravan crossing the vast Anatolian hills. He's talking about heroic mules and wildly exaggerated misadventures. And his audience is captivated. They respond in waves of soft ripple of laughter, a murmur of awe, or a quiet commentary that blends right back into the room's gentle hum. And nearby, a poet is improvising lines, inspired by the flickering lamplight and the curling steam from a fresh cup of coffee. He gets subtle nods and whispered words of approval from those listening intently. Historians today still argue about the true political and intellectual impact of these coffee houses. Some will tell you that they were powerful spaces that subtly shaped public opinion and even planted the seeds for social change. Others argue they were more of a reflection of society, cultural and recreational spots that mirrored existing trends rather than creating new ones. But whatever their exact role was, one thing is undeniable: their absolute centrality to the social life of the Ottoman city. And then you notice these little rituals that add another layer to the whole experience. A group of apprentices is gathered around, quietly observing a coffee-ground reading. It's a playful moment, but one that's also socially binding. Each one interprets the dark swirls in the cup differently. One sees a long journey ahead. Another laughs, predicting a sudden windfall of wealth. And a third just nods sagely, forecasting a very satisfying nap. It's a perfect example of how this space honors both the caffeine and the culture surrounding it. Near the window, the backgammon game continues. The pieces move across the board with soft, deliberate clicks, each move punctuating the larger rhythm of the room. It's a beautiful layering of activities, conversation, laughter, poetry, and even rest. The patrons just seem to interact so naturally within this framework, which shows you how this space can host so many different forms of human expression all at once, without any of them clashing. Historians also debate whether this seamless overlap of activities was intentionally designed or if it just emerged organically over time. But honestly, when you're sitting here, the reason almost doesn't matter. The effect is unmistakable. The coffee house has this incredible ability to sustain prolonged social interaction, deep intellectual engagement, and gentle repose, all within a single cohesive environment. It's a space that encourages you to stay, watch as newcomers enter, subtly absorb the established patterns of the room almost instantly. Their voices naturally lower, their gestures become a bit slower, and they calibrate their own energy to the room's gentle tempo. These social norms just circulate invisibly, preserving this delicate equilibrium while still allowing total freedom for creativity, for debate, and for simple relaxation. It's a self-regulating system that feels completely natural, and the sensory environment just continues to weave its magic. The warm glow from the lamps, the rich aroma of roasted coffee mixed with a hint of cardamom, the faint sweet smoke from pipesit, all combines to create this cocoon that encourages you to linger, to reflect, to just be. Even the simplest acts, like pouring a cup of coffee, moving a backgammon piece, or sharing a line of poetry, become part of a larger, beautifully layered orchestration. It's a system that allows for hours of engagement without a hint of fatigue. By now, the subtle genius of the Ottoman coffee house is crystal clear. It takes all these ordinary elements, simple wooden benches, small cups, hot coals, conversation, and even those little micro-nap sand, weaves them into a highly evolved system. Here, coffee, culture, rest, and social connection coexist in perfect harmony. It creates a space where time seems to stretch, and human interaction itself becomes something artful, relaxed, and truly enduring. Thank you so much for joining me on this little journey into the heart of an Ottoman coffee house. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history and culture, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time. The night deepens further, and the coffeehouse feels suspended in a timeless, almost meditative glow. Lamplight flickers across the walls, casting elongated shadows that mingle with the gentle curls of steam rising from freshly brewed coffee. You notice how the room moves as a single organism: soft laughter, the faint clink of backgammon pieces, and whispers of debate, and the occasional gentle sigh of a napping patron, all blending into a seamless rhythm. The longer you watch, the more it feels as if time itself slows, bending around the quiet energy of the space. A historical fact is that by the mid-17th century, coffee houses had become vital spaces for intellectual, social, and cultural exchange. Scholars, merchants, soldiers, and poets all shared the same benches, each contributing to discussions about literature, commerce, politics, and philosophy. The coffee house provided a rare environment where these diverse perspectives could coexist, fostering a layered social network across urban Ottoman life. You notice a storyteller near the center, gesturing dramatically as he recounts a caravan journey across Anatolia. Listeners respond with murmurs, laughter, and occasional corrections, creating a soft, interactive cadence. Nearby, a poet improvises verses, inspired by the glowing coals and curling steam, drawing appreciative nods and whispered commentary. Historians still debate the broader influence of coffeehouses. Some suggest they acted as informal forums that shaped public opinion and encouraged critical discussion. Others emphasize their recreational functions, reflecting pre-existing social currents rather than actively directing them. Regardless, the coffeehouse's centrality is undisputed. A quirky detail emerges in a corner where a few apprentices quietly interpret patterns in their coffee grounds. One claims a swirl predicts travel, another jokes about wealth, and a third predicts a restorative nap. These whimsical rituals, though lighthearted, serve to bond participants socially while adding an element of playful observation to the space. The backgammon boards continue their quiet rhythm. Moves are deliberate, discussions are soft, and spectators contribute gentle commentary. Regardless, the outcome is striking. The coffeehouse successfully accommodates intellectual, recreational, and restorative pursuits simultaneously. You notice the subtle transmission of social norms. Newcomers adjust instinctively to the room's gentle cadence, softening voices and moderating gestures. The sensory environment continues to reinforce the atmosphere. Aromas of coffee, cardamom, and faint pipe smoke mingle with the tactile warmth of cushions. By this hour, the genius of the Ottoman coffeehouse is evident. Ordinary objects and simple rituals combine to create a space of harmony. It is a meticulously evolved system designed for prolonged human interaction and subtle intellectual engagement. The coffeehouse now feels like a universe unto itself, insulated from the sleeping city outside. Lamplight flickers gently against the walls, casting soft amber shadows that move with the slightest stir of patrons or a shifting curtain. Steam rises lazily from fresh cups of coffee, curling into invisible spirals that seem to punctuate the room's gentle hum. You notice how the space itself seems attuned to the rhythms of its occupants, the subtle exhale of someone reclining, the soft clatter of backgammon pieces, the whispered response to a story all blending into a soothing, continuous pulse. By this time, coffeehouses were recognized, not only as spaces of leisure, but as central forums for the exchange of ideas and news. Travelers, merchants, and residents would gather to share information about distant provinces, current events, and cultural developments, creating a fluid, informal network of communication that extended well beyond the walls of the coffeehouse. You observe a storyteller leaning forward, narrating the exploits of a caravan moving through Anatolian hills. The tale is full of exaggerated peril, heroic mules, and colorful local characters. Listeners respond with murmurs of approval, laughter, and subtle corrections, their attention fluctuating with the narrative's peaks and pauses. Nearby, a poet improvises verses inspired by the flickering lamplight and the fragrant coffee aroma, prompting gentle applause and quiet, appreciative commentary. Patrons reclining against benches or walls drift in and out of micronaps. Their rhythmic breathing becoming part of the room's underlying cadence, historians still argue the degree to which coffeehouses influenced intellectual and political life. Some suggest these informal spaces shaped public opinion or encouraged debate. Others assert that their primary role was recreational, reflecting existing social and cultural currents rather than directing them. A small group of apprentices takes turns interpreting the coffee grounds in their cups, assigning predictions of travel, wealth, or even naps. Their playful debates and laughter highlight the whimsical, interactive aspect of coffeehouse culture. Backgammon continues quietly near the window, pieces moving with deliberate care, each soft click punctuating the layered activities around it. Conversation, debate, storytelling, and games coexist seamlessly, creating a multi-dimensional social ecosystem. Regardless, the coffeehouse successfully accommodates intellectual stimulation, play, social interaction, and rest within a single cohesive environment. You notice how newcomers adapt instinctively to the room's rhythm. Voices soften, gestures slow, and subtle social cues are absorbed almost unconsciously. The sensory environment, the warm glow of lamps, the aroma of roasted coffee and cardamom, the faint smoke from pipe scriettes, an immersive experience. By this late hour, the Ottoman coffeehouse reveals its quiet brilliance. Ordinary benches, cups, coals, and conversations combine to form a space where culture and calm coexist seamlessly, enduring for centuries. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, a unique rhythm pulsed through the winding city streets, the warm, aromatic heartbeat of the coffeehouse. More than just a place for a drink, it was a sanctuary of community, where the clinking of spoons met a symphony of quiet engagement. By the 17th century, these spaces became the city's intellectual living room, where hours dissolved into steam and deep, lingering conversation. Here, news was shared through the animated gestures of the storyteller, an elderly man whose tales held the room in a state of wonder. Nearby, poets found inspiration in the rising aroma, while others engaged in the quiet, strategic clatter of backgammon pieces on wooden boards. Even the young apprentices participated in this social fabric, playfully interpreting patterns in coffee grounds, their laughter adding a light melody to the room. It was a perfected social system where every newcomer instinctively softened their voice, entering a space of mutual respect and timeless rest. The Ottoman coffeehouse remains a testament to the enduring power of human connection, warmth, and the simple art of being together. Step into the amber-lit heart of a historical Ottoman coffeehouse, where time is measured by the slow rising of steam. This is a sanctuary of sophisticated social interaction, a place where the city's frantic rhythm dissolves into a collective exhale. The air is thick with the scent of roasted beans and the quiet murmur of shared presence. Near the glowing hearth, the storyteller begins his journey, his voice a bridge between the present and the legends of the Silk Road. His hands weave the air as he recounts a caravan journey, his listeners leaning in with subtle nods of appreciation. Nearby, the poet captures the soul of the room, his charcoal stick dancing across parchment as verses take flight in the flickering lamplight. The coffeehouse is also a theater of intellect, where quiet, earnest debates shape the civic spirit of the city. But for some, the greatest wisdom is found in silence, a restorative micronap amidst the hum of the room. The young apprentice looks deep into the dark grounds, interpreting the patterns with a playful smile and a hopeful eye. The steady, rhythmic click of backgammon pieces provides a percussive heartbeat to the afternoon. As a newcomer enters, they instinctively lower their voice, aligning their movement with the room's ancient, unspoken choreography. Cardamom, roasted beans, and the soft glow of oil lamp stees are the elements of a timeless ecosystem. In this space, we find the art of slow living, where every cup is a connection and every moment is a ritual. As the day fades, the coffeehouse remains a vessel for the human soul, forever rhythmic, forever calm. As midnight settles over the winding streets of Istanbul, the world outside begins to fade into a quiet, starlit silence. Step inside, and you are greeted by the golden embrace of lamplight, a sanctuary where the night is just beginning to breathe. The air is thick with the scent of roasted beans and the soft, rhythmic pulsing of glowing coals beneath the copper set. Here, time slows down. Patrons recline against the walls, some lost in deep thought, others drifting into restorative micronaps amidst the low hum. This is more than a place for a drink. It is a sophisticated social organism, a 17th century hub where the mind finds its spark. At the center of it all stands the storyteller. With a salt and pepper beard and expressive hands, he weaves tales of ancient caravans in distant lands. The listeners lean in, their faces illuminated by the hearth, responding with soft murmurs of approval and gentle laughter that fills the space. Nearby, the poet sits in quiet contemplation. His quill moves across parchment, capturing the flickering shadows and the quiet brilliance of the evening. The younger generation brings a playful energy. Two apprentices lean over a finished cup, searching for secrets hidden within the dark coffee grounds. They point at whimsical shapes, laughing quietly as they interpret the patterns as omens of good fortune or upcoming adventures. Across the room, the sharp click of backgammon pieces punctuates the air, a rhythmic reminder of the friendly competition that thrives here. Players whisper their strategies, their eyes sparkling with the joy of the game, fully immersed in this delicate balance of rest and play. As newcomers enter from the cool night air, they instantly adopt the room's rhythm, lowering their voices to match the gentle atmosphere. Observe the sensory details, the coarse texture of cardamom pods, the oily sheen of roasted beans, and the swirling blue traces of pipe smoke. This ecosystem supports both the mind and the body. In one corner, a patron has surrendered to a nap, his spirit restored by the collective calm. Even the ordinary objects, the low benches and well-worn cups, seem to pulse with the history and harmony of this enduring social tradition. In the Ottoman coffee house, energy and calm coexist in perfect symmetry. Intellectual fire is balanced by the restorative power of pause. As the camera pulls back, the coffee house remains a beacon of quiet brilliance, a testament to the timeless need for human connection and rest. The lights dim, the voices soften, and the historic rhythm of Istanbul continues. Anchored by the harmony of the coffee house night, before the sun touches the minarets of Istanbul, the coffee house breathes. It is a world of amber shadows and the soft crackle of glowing embers. In this sacred hour, time seems to slow. The heavy air is thick with the promise of the day's first brew, rich and dark. The copper cesk rests patiently upon the hot coals. Slowly, a graceful curl of steam begins to rise, carrying the sharp scent of cardamom. This is more than a drink. It is the catalyst for a social ecosystem that has defined the empire for centuries. As the first patrons arrive, the room fills with a low murmur. Conversations are hushed, respectful of the lingering night. The rhythmic click of backgammon pieces provides a steady heartbeat to the room. In the corner, a man enjoys a restorative nap. Then, the storyteller begins. His voice is a thread that weaves the room together, spinning tales of heroes and ancient wonders. His listeners lean in, their faces illuminated by the lamp's glow, responding with soft laughter and knowing nods to every dramatic turn. In a quieter alcove, the poet finds his muse. The scratch of his reed pen is the only sound in his private world. He watches the flame of a single lamp, transmuting the atmosphere of the coffee house into verses that will outlive the dawn. Near the hearth, the young apprentice and his friend share a moment of levity, peer into the future through the dark dregs of a cup. They interpret the whimsical swirls of the grounds, finding shapes and fortunes in the sediment, their young faces bright with amusement. Backgammon continues with a rhythmic, deliberate pace. Each move is a silent dialogue between friends, a ritual of strategy and chance. When newcomers enter, they step softly. They sense the rhythm of the space and adjust their voices to match the established calm. This is the sensory cocoon of the Ottoman world. The faint traces of pipe smoke catch the light like drifting ghosts. There is beauty in the simplicity of a ceramic cup, the grain of a wooden bench, and the shared peace of 1,000 mornings. As the pre-dawn blue begins to fade into a soft morning gray, the coffee house stands as a perfected social ecosystem. Here, energy and calm coexist. Culture is brewed in every cup, and every storyteller's word is a stitch in the fabric of history. In the heart of the Ottoman night, the coffee house transforms into a sacred sanctuary, a hub of intellectual life and social connection. As the city sleeps, the warm amber glow of oil lamps flickers against worn wooden benches, welcoming those seeking refuge in conversation. The ritual begins with the copper says. Over glowing coals, the coffee reaches a boil, sending delicate tendrils of steam into the air. Patrons recline in the shadows. Some whisper in low tones, while others drift into micronaps, suspended in this hypnotic, timeless atmosphere. The storyteller takes his place. His shadow looms large on the wall as he recounts the legends of ancient caravan journeys. Every listener is captivated. They nod in agreement, their soft laughter punctuating the quiet of the night like a rhythmic pulse. Nearby, the poet recites verses. His rhythmic gestures mirror the curling steam, turning spoken words into a visual dance. More than just a place for coffee, this is a center for news and debate, where the city's pulse is truly felt. Even the youth take part. The apprentice peers into a cup, interpreting the dark patterns of coffee grounds for an amused patron. The clicking of backgammon pieces provides a steady backdrop. It is a game of strategy, played with quiet whispers and focused eyes. An unspoken choreography guides the room. Newcomers enter softly, matching the slow, rhythmic flow of the space instinctively. Cardamom fills the air, mixing with the blue haze of pipe smoke that drifts lazily toward the high vaulted ceiling. This coffeehouse is a living organism. It balances restorative pause with intellectual fire, a cocoon of warmth in the dark. As the pre-dawn hours approach, the fire dims. The stories conclude, leaving only the memory of a shared night. The flame flickers one last time. In this silence, the legacy of the Ottoman coffeehouse remains, a testament to the power of community. The coffeehouse now rests in the soft, fragile edge of dawn. The amber lamplight flickers its final whispers as the first pale streaks of morning seep through narrow windows. Catching the rising steam from Sesby, you notice how the room seems suspended between night and day, a liminal space where the slow hum of conversation blends into a gentle rhythm. Every sound, movement, and gesture feels deliberate, yet effortless, as if the coffeehouse itself has become a living, breathing organism. By this period, Ottoman coffeehouses had solidified their reputation as enduring social and cultural institutions. They were places where information, stories, poetry, and debates coalesced, binding diverse patrons together. Long hours of lingering were not unusual, and micronaps were an accepted, even expected part of the environment. You watch a storyteller near the hearth, weaving a caravan tale filled with improbable mishaps and heroic mules. Listeners respond with murmurs and soft laughter that flow seamlessly into the room's ambient hum. Nearby, a poet improvises lines inspired by the curling steam and fading lamplight, prompting nods and whispered commentary. Historians still debate the extent of the coffeehouse's influence on intellectual and civic life. Either way, their centrality in Ottoman society is undeniable. Apprentices playfully interpret coffee grounds, assigning predictions of travel, wealth, or impending naps. Backgammon continues in the corners, each soft click punctuating the room's multi-layered rhythm. The coffeehouse demonstrates remarkable equilibrium, a single space accommodating intellectual engagement, social interaction, and restorative pause. Newcomers instinctively mirror the soft cadence, integrating seamlessly into the established rhythm. The sensory environment, warm lamplight, aroma of cardamom, and faint traces of pipe smoke creates a cocoon of immersive comfort. By the final hour of night, the genius of the Ottoman coffeehouse is undeniable. Energy.com, culture, and human connection coexist flawlessly, mastering the art of lingering. The night outside has softened into the delicate gray of early morning, and the coffeehouse exhales a final, gentle sigh. You feel the warmth of the lamps fading just slightly, the coals in the Sesv now glowing only faintly. The room seems to fold inward, conserving the echoes of stories told, laughter shared, and debates pondered. The coffeehouse has taught you a soft lesson in rhythm, how energy and repose can coexist in harmony. As the city outside awakens and the first hints of sunlight brush against the windows, you feel the lingering serenity of this space. Breathe slowly, let the warmth, the soft sounds, and the rich aroma fade gradually into your mind. You are safe, you are calm, and you are carried gently from this night into the day that awaits.